So I noticed two things about my sati recently. The first one is that it was getting quicker. I could notice very subtle hindrances arising. Like I could tell that it was worry. It's very, very subtle. I was like, nope, don't wanna go there. And so I've been noticing that. I also for a little maybe like 30, 40 minutes or so, I noticed that it felt like my sati had like a negative like tinge to it. Like every time that I was noticing something, like I was getting progressively more critical. And so I had to change my approach where instead of trying to be playful or gladden the mind by being like cheerful, I switched it to just being more forgiving, and that seemed to um, be good. It seemed like what was required, and yeah, so that was interesting. Because it seemed like sometimes when I'm like I was feeling annoyed, and earlier I was feeling sad for really no reason whatsoever. Um, I'm not sure if it's like just old crap just rising to the surface. Um, but in any case, um, yeah, it seemed that like the my normal attitude, which is like oh, like how wonderful you noticed such and such arising, like that attitude was disingenuous, and the more that I tried to um take on that attitude, the more um critical and like it's not working, like I was becoming. And so so I changed the approach where it was just like, all right, I'm just gonna forgive every single time that like something comes up that I consider to be a problem. I'm just gonna forgive it for happening. Um, so yeah, that's what's been going on.
All right. I'll have to say it kind of this way. I congratulate you for making that connection.
Hmm.
You see, in the beginning and for quite a while into it, students do remain critical of their practice because our practice will never be up to our expectations of practice.
Hmm.
That the reality of the situation is that, as you're saying about the sadness doesn't seem to need a source other than just something that kicks off that instinct of sadness. And
Hmm.
you don't maybe even know what it was. It could have been a flash of a thought, it could have been a mental image, or it could have been basically nothing at all or not visual, some other kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, even to the point of merely scratching your head at a particular spot, causing a sensation that sparks an old memory feeling.
Hmm.
We don't know where that stuff comes from, but it does arise right out of the sankara
Mm-hmm.
and or stored memory base or instinctual stuff plus all of the childhood learning that we put on top of that instinct. Um, but the sadness, above all, when we're talking about it like that, is based in ignorance now
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know the source of it. We're not sad about somebody dying. We're just sad, and there's no cause or reason for it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the same thing is actually kind of true about us being critical of ourselves. It comes from the same source, and that we were trained to be critical of ourselves when we were children because that's how we were trained by the adults. They were critical of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we become kind of internally critical when, if the intention is to watch the breath and the mind wanders away from the breath, and as soon as we recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, we will become critical.
Yeah.
That's basically the first thing that happens with students. Later, in your case, now that you've been practicing for 4 or 5 months and calling, um, you're you're beginning to see that criticism directly.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's really, really great. And that the technique that we've been using of gladdening the mind, we start with that quality of, aha, I see you, Myra, and bringing it in a playful way. But
Mm-hmm.
now you're saying that even though that playfulness um, has a really great advantage, it's not quite yet real for me, artificial in a way.
Sometimes it is real. But
Okay, all
yeah.
right.
But sometimes it's not. Yeah.
It's good that you're making that distinction now, that
Mm-hmm.
you're beginning to see it. Um, but you can also think of when a naughty child or a child is acting naughty in front of maybe not a close family member, but an old wise uncle, then that uncle will generally be playful with
Mm-hmm.
the child. And that playfulness that we're talking about here is a form of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Like the image that came was Homer Simpson choking or throttling Bart
Mm-hmm.
for something that he had said. That's the criticism part that we attack. But when our attack is softened through love and joy and that aha, I see you quality, actually starts to bring in the quality of that it's okay. That in fact, the real good part about it is that we can see that that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore we have the advantage, and so forgiveness. Um, Now, there's actually um, quite an important distinction between Christian forgiveness and Buddha forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Christians will sometimes say, I forgive you, but I won't forget.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, it has the quality that's based upon what happened with Jesus. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, because he's actually doing that in an abstract way without the ones to be forgiven being present.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even sure who he's pointing at that point, at that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Here's what I mean. Is he asking forgiveness for the Jews who, and Caiaphas and the Pharisees who brought him to justice? Or was he saying forgiveness to Pontius Pilate for actually doing the deed? Or is he talking about forgiveness for the guards who actually nailed him up? Or is it kind of the whole lot of it and
Mm-hmm.
throwing it all out? But this is the point then that Christianity comes from, is in the sense that forgiveness is a big deal. All right, within the Buddhist context, especially in the sense of staying out of the past, that the easiest way to forgive someone in the beginning of it is just forget all about it.
Mm-hmm.
Just forget it. It's gone. Okay, and that we then would take right effort to make sure that those thoughts are gone. And so if you've had an argument with someone, and maybe it was someone you really wanted to have a close relationship with, and they've rejected you or something,
Mm-hmm.
every time you think about that, it's going to be painful. And so the best thing to do is to not think about it, to let it go. Literally, let it go from the mind and stop thinking about it. And in that regard, forget about forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also a place or two in the suttas where it's actually on two different occasions. One is between the Buddha and a particular monk, and another one is between two monks. So there's two different occasions of it here, to where, um, in the case of the monk with the Buddha, the issue was around when to eat, and that this monk was angry at the Buddha for changing the rules so that he could go out at night because in that time of India, the best food was served at night. In fact, the Indians still do that.
Mm.
Um, Basically, they cook all day and then eat all evening. So um, when I first was getting into this, I was thinking that the people would get up early and cook for the monks,
Mm-hmm.
or that the reason that they went out early in the morning was because that was when the food available. What I came to learn in Thailand, no, that's the leftovers from last night's party.
Mm.
That's what the monks get, is the leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
And so this monk and the other monks were going out at night, even though that it was dangerous. And the Buddha gave 10 dangers for the reason to not go out at night. Now that we have street lights, it's basically daylight almost everywhere you go because you can see where you're going. But you can imagine a culture where there's no electricity, no
Mm-hmm.
power.
Mm-hmm.
And so going out at night is kind of dangerous. You can fall into a thicket. You can fall into a cesspool. A cesspool is basically an outdoor toilet. Um, you can go into the red light district by mistake. There are thieves out there, and also it's an inconvenience on the people if they're eating to stop eating and come and feed the monks then. And so the Buddha decided he didn't want the monks out at night. This monk didn't like that at all because his best food was going out at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what the Buddha said to accommodate him, but it's been a tradition ever since, is when you eat your morning meal, go ahead and get enough so that you have enough contents in your bowl so that you can eat that throughout the day when you want to,
Mm-hmm.
but that the food is not kept overnight because number one, it'll spoil, and number two, the animals will come for it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if there's any food left at the end of the day when the monk retires at night, is to throw it out for the animals to have it because they're going to come get it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this guy didn't like that, and over a period of time, the monks around him knew that he was holding that grudge, that he wouldn't forget about it. And so he came to the Buddha, and the Buddha had just forgotten all about it. Okay, so um, this is basically the way that we look at it. And so when that happened, the Buddha just automatically forgave him.
Mm-hmm.
That he came for penance. He was sorry that he responded badly when the Buddha, in fact, gave him a way out,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't get what he wanted. So now he's saying that he's been practicing and he figured out that the Buddha was right. and the Buddha had just forgotten about it, not holding a grudge, did not need to forgive him because it had already been forgotten about. Therefore, the forgiveness was dead easy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that is also in the other sutta, is that forgiveness is actually not an issue ever until the guilty party comes to ask for forgiveness. That in the way that you're practicing your meditation, the being playful
Mm-hmm.
with with the hindrance that you've just caught is in a way already of forgiving yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because you're literally throwing that out of the mind. You're forgetting it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea of forgive and forget, it's got a kind of a different quality between the Western mind and the
Mm-hmm.
Eastern mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I invite you to take on the more Eastern mind point of view, in the sense that forgiveness is not necessary, but forgetting it is the primary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the West, when they think that forgiveness is more important than forgetting about it, then the forgiveness is not really that strong.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of an intentional or aspirational thing, but it is only when it's forgotten that it actually is forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this brings back a lesson that comes from Chang Tzu, which is more Chinese, but it's very easy. In fact, I've been recently reviewing the Tao Te Ching, and I actually find out that Buddhism is actually mentioned in there. So
Uh-huh.
the Buddhism got to China far earlier than most people think, or the use of the word is badly translated or whatever like that. We don't quite know sure, because I don't read Chinese and have no interest in learning it. Uh, but the point there is, it comes from the shoe. When the shoe is right, the foot is forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now that happens all the time. In fact, that's part of the reason why the Buddha recommends his dudes go barefoot, is
Mm-hmm.
because you do not forget about your feet when you. But when the foot, when the shoe is right, fits and all of that, then the foot's forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next line is then when the heart is right, then for and against are forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now in this issue of the forgiveness, that against is remembered and held, even though the forgiveness is there. But literally, when the heart is right, when your heart is open, then you'll forget about any of the transgressions with other people. But we
Mm-hmm.
can use that internally for our own mind,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that, uh, so in this respect, this is the way that it would go. The first time that we start practicing, we criticize ourselves. The next step would be uh, uh, becoming playful and teasing. The next one would be the issue of just kind of throwing it out altogether. Just
Mm-hmm.
forget about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is the way. And so what you're doing is you're slightly mixing forgiveness in with the gladdening the mind, or the joy. But in both cases, we forget about it. We throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't dwell on that. So that combination then is the way to go. So whenever you find yourself criticizing yourself or your own practice for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
that's a time to note sati, to remember, to look, to see that criticism is not self improvement.
Yeah, so it's not criticism with words or anything. It's just
A gut wrenching reaction.
yeah, yeah, it's just like I think what it might also have been would be over efforting. Like Maybe holding the intention to be mindful too tightly.
Wanting too much out of it.
Yeah, and I think because later on in the day, I loosened up a bit with with the effort, and that seemed to be useful. So I'm gonna keep exploring how much effort is needed in any given moment.
And also, what you're beginning to do is to change these old patterns of being critical with yourself. And the way that you're getting critical with yourself is by having high expectations and working too hard. So all of those things are running around each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so this new way of doing it, of that aha, I see you, actually pulls us out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been listening to Eckhart Tolle, and he's talking about that also,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of separating ourselves from who and what we have been and who we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not that. In fact, you are not that criticism. You are not that working too hard.
Mm-hmm.
You you are not that high expectations. Those are merely just old habits
Mm-hmm.
that we picked up as children.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even sure of how they got built up, and that's also the basis of ignorance, that we formed those old habits as children out of ignorance. Now you're beginning to change them out of direct understanding, out of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
But still, those things were not you, never were. Though when we are self-criticizing, we think that we are the critical, we are the criticized. And in fact, you're not any of those things. That's just merely a dialogue between two functions of the mind, between basically it would be the mammalian brain and the reptilian brain.
Mm-hmm.
But Byrne is much more kind by calling it the parent and the child.
Mm-hmm.
All of our stored shoulds, ought to be's, standards about how to practice and all of that kind of stuff, expectations. And the critical part is that uh, parent ego state, the
Mm-hmm.
sum total of all the learning that we have had, all the rites, rules, rituals, etc., like that. In Pali, the Buddha calls it sila bhatta paramasa. We're attached to the way things ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that dialogue then is directed at the one who is criticized, which is basically the child ego state or the one who feels that criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And is also that mammalian brain, excuse me, the reptilian brain that experiences and feels joy and elation.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, that's the part of the mind that does that, that the frontal cortex, the one that we need to wake up, is
Mm-hmm.
actually the observer or the one who can really see what's going on. That's your wisdom base. And
Mm-hmm.
yet it's not in gear quite often.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually shut off because all of the effort and the energy from the blood is going elsewhere. But when we start taking deep breath, then there is enough, and that's really the wake up. This is
Mm-hmm.
why breathing is so important with that, is because now we're adding a third ingredient to that dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And that one's the one that takes the most energy or the most. That's why the top of the head gets hot when we're thinking.
Mm.
Not a hot head. In fact, the hot head is not hot there. So um, basically, what then the adult part of the brain is doing is he's telling the super ego, down boy. Stop
Mhm.
giving yourself so many rules. Stop having so many expectations. Stop working so hard,
Mhm.
and give the child a chance to breathe. Give the child a chance to have joy.
Mhm.
So instead of forcing joy or expecting joy, another
Mhm.
way to do it would be talking to yourself in the sense of inviting joy,
Mhm.
because you know that sometimes it feels artificial and sometimes it's real. So
Mhm.
what was the distinction? What was the difference? How can you invite yourself into real joy?
Mhm.
Hmm? How can you do that? Think about that. If it's through forgiveness, but
Mhm.
in a way, aha, I see you is forgiving, or it can be harsh.
Mhm.
But we're doing it generally in a joyful, forgiving way. Aha, I see that. And by doing that, it kind of throws it out. We forget it.
Yeah, I'll have to play with it some more.
That's the right word to use.
Because even when I make sure that the tone is playful and cheerful, sometimes I can still just kind of tell that it's incongruent with with like what the underlying intention is, and so I'll have to yeah.
Recognize that exactly. You're beginning to see that those subtle qualities in there.
Yeah,
That you at
yeah.
one level you can say, "Aha, I see you," but at that deeper, more subtle, non-verbal almost level, you're still
Mm-hmm.
criticizing yourself.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'll have to work with that.
Good. No, use the word play the first time.
Yeah, I'll play with that too.
Play with it exactly,
Yeah,
because this stuff happens really fast.
yeah.
About the only thing that you can do is see the tail lights.
Hmm.
Because it's hard to see it coming. Once you get used to seeing the tail lights, then
Mm-hmm.
you'll be able to see it as it's coming rather than as it's going.
Mm-hmm.
First time we wake up to it is, oh yeah, that was criticism,
Mm-hmm.
because we see it after it's there. You begin to experience kind of the result of the after, or maybe the stench of the tailpipe after the car has gone by,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the actual uh, instantaneous split second of time where that criticism happened. And now you're dealing with the after. But as you gain sati, you will actually see that instant time of that criticism as it comes up when it's
Mm-hmm.
there. See it. And then you can say, aha, I see you criticism. Aha,
Mm-hmm.
I could see you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot that can happen in the mind right at that point of sati.
Mm-hmm.
Because normally the first thing that happens is people criticize themselves. This is what gives rise to that concept that is so common in the meditation retreats, the word monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
Monkey mind, right? Because the student is dissatisfied with his own progress.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's well known among the volunteer groups that work with the Goenka that on the first day of the retreat, the students' mind will wander away 4, 5, or 6 times, and they begin to get a little bit critical of that, while at the same time, sati is beginning. They're budding sati. They're getting it. By
Mm-hmm.
day 6, now they're catching the mind wandering away 30 or 40 times in that sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're beginning to get really super critical when in fact what's really going on is a marvelous new skill is being to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And so by developing that skill of sati, they're seeing more and more often the mind has wandered away, the mind is in the ditch or whatever like that. And so now they have much more opportunity to begin to catch that criticism, that critical mind that used to take over.
Mm-hmm.
Many times it will happen that the student recognizes the mind wandering away, and then he'll start having a new kind of thought system that is at least as unwholesome as the one that he had before sati. And that is, oh, me, this is so hard. Maybe I'll quit this retreat. Maybe this is not the right time to do the retreat. Maybe this is not a good teacher. Maybe this is not a good technique. And you can hear where the mind will go with all of that kind of confusion and doubt
Mm-hmm.
because of that criticism, that they're in a state of not liking the fact that they cannot control their mind because they thought that it was my mind all along.
Mm-hmm.
This is my mind. How dare this mind dog of mine disobey?
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, the skill is not to see the disobedience or not to be the disobedience, but really to see it and to separate ourselves out of it. So that separation quality is then basically coming out of the reptilian brain thought process and into the more human thought process, which does have joy and forgiveness built into it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the real adult. The parent's job is to, oh, you got to do what I tell you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the adult is the part that we're going to nourish the mind. And so we can think of that forgiveness as part of nourishing it. But we also see that joy as nourishing the mind,
Mm-hmm.
uh, giving it uh, giving it the benefit, including the benefit of the doubt that I just mentioned. About am I doing right? The answer is yes. I just caught the mind wandering away. I'm doing the right thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And so the doubts are being dispelled here, where with criticism, there was a lot of doubt surrounding it and hanging around in the background. But
Mm-hmm.
now that we're giving ourselves permission that this is great, this is okay. So now is the forgiveness is easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a way of looking at it. And I like what you're saying there, that sometimes the joy doesn't feel genuine. So
Mm-hmm.
let's see what we can do, even with the quality of forgiveness, to make that more genuine, to really
Mm-hmm.
say, yeah, this is genuine. This is good.
Mm-hmm.
So you can begin to work at that level also, is to recognize, aha, I see you. Is that genuine, or is it with a twinge of criticism, or is it
Mm-hmm.
laced with forgiveness and joy and acceptance?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is what we're looking for, and I'm glad that you brought that distinction up.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, what we're talking about is acceptance and forgetting it. In other words, it happened, we accept that, and now we let it go, or we forgive it, or we throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way uh, that we would begin to work. But if the joy is not genuine, then it's really hard to throw that out. We're still clinging to it a bit.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. Does
Mm-hmm.
that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. This is all great. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So, do you have another question in anything in particular with this practice? How's your blindfold stuff going?
I didn't do today. I started work early, so I just never put it on today. Um, I might put it on tomorrow, and then I'll very much more likely put it on Friday because I don't work on Friday. So
Okay. All right.
yeah. but I like putting it on. Yeah, it makes the meditation feel more continuous.
Hmm.
So and
That's in exactly the right way of looking at it. Is yes, this is why we work with um, sitting down in a chair or standing up or watching the hands as a movement,
hmm
um, and that while that kind of takes a lot of work uh, to do it many times throughout the day. We have to actually remember and remember. So remember now becomes an active effort in a way.
hmm
But with the blindfold, um, the efforts that we're taking out is the efforts of daily living that are interfered with because we cannot see with the eyes, and
hmm
therefore the mindfulness gets really sharp.
hmm Yeah, I it also like I don't go on my phone, I don't read the news, I don't play video games, so I'm just spending more time uh keeping track of the breath. So just in terms
Hmm.
of quantity, it's more, there's more practice doing it that with the
Uh-huh.
blindfold.
And what do you think about smiling? Have you been smiling a whole lot more after you started practicing?
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
smile. It was one of the interesting things earlier today when I was feeling sadness was there was a smile on my face, and in the face it was there were pleasant sensations, but in the chest and stomach it was recognizably sad emotions.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it was interesting. But
Okay.
I like wearing the smile. I like sometimes I'll breathe. I'll pretend like I'm breathing through the smile that as a way to gladden the mind.
Yes,
Uh,
that's a good point.
yeah. So I do smile when I'm sitting. Yeah.
So let's work a bit with that sadness again
Sure.
that you're mentioning. Um, you've actually had now the thought to the thought pattern that this sadness has no um, immediate source.
Mm-hmm.
That I have not just broken my bicycle or something. That
Right.
didn't happen.
Right.
This is sadness is coming up. So one of the ways of working at it, with it is to recognize where it is in the body. Generally, sadness is a little lower than in the chest,
Mm-hmm.
but for some people they experiencing it, but it generally does have a body component,
Mm-hmm.
and it's within the area of the breathing. And so, what the advice is to imagine that, or to use the mind or focus the mind on that area of the body,
Mm-hmm.
and then breathe into it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, see if you can begin to move that part of the body around with the breath,
Mm-hmm.
so that it has rising and falling and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that in fact, sadness is very closely related to anxiety.
Mm.
That the one thing that anxiety has that sadness doesn't is attention, or let's say it like this: holding a cup, and the cup slips out of your hand,
Mm-hmm.
and then you make a mad dash for to try to catch it before it falls. That
Mm-hmm.
mad dash of trying to catch it before it falls is anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're good at it. Sometimes we can catch that falling cup. That happens quite often, but
Mm.
many times we miss it and the
Mhm.
cup falls
Mhm.
and it's broken, it's lost.
Mhm.
That's the sadness then. But the original point of I've lost the cup first creates anxiety. Can I get it back?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the sadness that I can't get it back.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sadness, it's a sense of loss. I had it and now I don't have it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This sadness is closely related to grief. And there's a really important sutra, I think it's number 86, and the name of the sutra is Grief Comes from Those Who Are Dear. In other words, if that cup didn't mean anything to you, then you're not going to be very sad about it.
Mm-hmm.
But let us say that it's a cup that was highly decorated and your grandfather gave it to you from the old country or whatever, things like that. And now that cup is dear.
Mm-hmm.
So when it breaks, there's grief, there's sadness built into that loss.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what are we going to do about it? Well, in that case, there's the only thing that can be done that's logical is clean up the mess,
Mm-hmm.
throw it in the garbage, and now that it's gone, forget about it. Because every time we think about that grandfather's stein or mug that broke, I'm going to feel bad. I lost
Mm-hmm.
it again. So there's that there's that forgetfulness quality of it, and possibly the best way to do it is to forgive yourself for having dropped that cup.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. I didn't need it. It sat on the shelf. I didn't even drink out of that cup. We really didn't need it. There was really no loss in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also with the situation with family members or people that we lose people too.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buddha talks about grief comes from those who are dear. And that the way that we think about it is that that doesn't mean that we're going to stop having people close and dear to us.
Mm-hmm.
That whenever we have a close friend, we think of him as a dear friend. But if that dear friend turns on you in any way at all, including dying, I mean, what a terrible thing for a friend to do to me is to die on me. But then there's going to be grief over the loss of that friendship.
Yeah.
So we have to plan on that grief. If you have a mother, then when that mother dies, there's going to be grief. I don't know many guys that never had a mother. It's
Mm-hmm.
possible, I suppose, but we're in the area of religion and magic when we go there.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, though, everyone has a family and everyone is going to lose members of their family. Are
Mm-hmm.
you ready for that? Can you handle that grief knowing now? Can you get yourself ready so that when mom dies, you can say a happy goodbye to her?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a way that we begin to notice is that we're going to lose everything. Everything is anicca. Anicca vata sankara. Everything, every cup, every person, everything. And that we say, well, wait a minute. There are people who are going to outlive me. Yes, but in that case, when one dies, he loses everything.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who wrote it, but there's a poem, an ancient poem about it, probably 300 years old, that talks about that I'm in charge of the entire world and I can make the world completely disappear. Every person is gone, nothing is left. And all I have to do that is with this dagger.
Mm-hmm.
That if I use this dagger, I can make the whole world completely disappear. Everything is gone, including everything that I'm attached to. So, um, this grief is going to come. If we plan on it correctly, then the letting go of that grief is easy. But this sadness that you have reoccurring is possibly because of the loss of something, and you don't even remember what it was that was lost, that all the memory is left is that feeling of sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this is actually so common that you could call it the human dilemma or the human plight. that we feel grief, we feel sad, we feel a great loss of something, almost as if there was a huge hole inside of us, that we've lost something, there's something gone, there's something missing. We don't know what it is, but we experience the sadness of that loss. And so the Christians come in and say, well, guess what? That hole you have inside is God's shape. Here, all you have to do is add this magic ingredient that we call God, and it will plug up that hole.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. More than likely, the hole is not God shaped. More than likely, the God is hole shaped
Mm.
in the sense of whatever that hole is, that we're going to shove something in there and think that it's going to fit. But God generally is not hole shaped, and neither is a bicycle. Some people throw a bicycle into that hole, and what I'm saying is that the loss of an old bicycle is best managed for most ordinary people with a new bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
When this laptop breaks, we just replace it and put in another one and forget about the old one. So, uh, but when we experience this deep loss and grief that's old, the way to manage it is by breathing into it and breaking it up and saying goodbye to it. I don't know what that sadness is, but I don't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a sense of loss. It's a sense of making a hole inside of ourselves. And so that's exactly the way that sadness feels. It feels like an emptiness, like a loss, like something is gone or missing inside. But Buddhism, as you know, and have been experiencing it, Buddhism is not an additive religion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's it's a subtractive or a negative thing. That we work with sunyata and emptiness. We work with uh, dropping or eradicating defilements and not replacing them. To where with most systems, it's, oh, well, I've got this mess. The way to handle this mess is by covering it over or burying it with something else, something new. Okay. That new bicycle takes away the sadness of the loss of the old bicycle, is the normal way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
But within Buddhism, we say, no, we're going to start working with these feelings directly. An example of that would be if we feel anxiety, and that the way to get out of anxiety is by going and doing something that's going to eliminate that anxiety. I think I've told you before of the story of the old um, goat herd in ancient times living in his hovel, and he's full of anxiety there in the night.
Oh yeah. Builds the
Yeah,
fence.
all
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so he goes out and he fixes the fence,
yeah.
but the fence did not eliminate the anxiety. That the new bicycle does not eliminate the anxiety or the loss or the sadness over the old bicycle. And we can easily see that when the second new bicycle is removed, now we've got loss and sadness about losing two bicycles.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, in fact, the new bicycle is not a complete substitute for the loss of the old bicycle, because the loss of the old bicycle is still there and
Right.
can come up when the time is right. And the
Mm-hmm.
time that's right is when we lose the new bicycle. Now we've got
Mm-hmm.
double amount of sadness.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now that we're recognizing we've got to deal with this stuff directly,
Mm-hmm.
because doing it indirectly, the way that we've been trained our whole lives, working through the outside world to solve an inside problem, is not right. It doesn't work. We've got to solve that internal issue internally.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we do that is with recognizing the sadness, beginning to breathe into it, recognizing that this sadness is in fact manifesting itself as a bodily sensation,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not actually thinking about the lost cup or bicycle or granny or whatever it is. All we're left with is the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start dealing with that feeling then much more directly. One
Mhm.
way of working with it is, can you actually move it around in the body?
Mhm.
Can you make it pulsate? Can you make it grow? Can you make it shrink? Can you have any control over it at all with the breath? If you can, now that's not um, a sadness that is an enemy. It's now an, a meditation object that you are able to manipulate and play with,
Mhm.
in the sense that now you're taking control of it. Before, in almost all occasions when people are sad, um, it is, let us use the word for a moment, overwhelming, or that the sadness is in charge. The sadness is the boss.
Mhm.
But what we're going to do instead is we're going to take up uh, that power and take that power away from it by taking control over it. And this is how we're doing it. We're breathing into it. We're checking it out. We're taking a good look, finding out where it is. It could be, in fact, in two different places. It could be both in the chest and in the abdomen. But
Mhm.
wherever it is, we're going to start manipulating it at that physical level. Can I
Mhm.
make it big? Can I make it small? Can it change with the in and the out breath, for instance? Can I
Mhm.
make it bigger on an in breath and smaller on an out breath? In that regard, can we literally breathe that sadness out?
Mhm.
Now, when we understand that that sadness is actually more than likely a sensation of the body that's associated with a bodily body chemistry maneuver or reaction or action of some kind. And so, by changing our own physiology, by breathing deeply into it and intentionally expelling it, we're actually changing the body's physiology
Mhm.
concerning that sadness. And so, by manipulating the body and manipulating it through our mind and our breathing, we begin to take control over it.
Mhm.
And so, whenever the sadness comes now, it's no longer an enemy. It becomes a friend, so that
Mhm.
we can make friends out of, and you can actually forgive yourself from feeling sad, because that's a normal thing. Anytime that humans lose something, we feel sad over the loss of it.
Mhm.
In fact, one of the major places where people feel sad is when their brand new automobile gets its first dent or scratch. That dent or scratch made my new car now imperfect, and I somehow have lost something,
Mhm.
thinking that the value of it has gone down or something like that. So these are things that happen to people, and it um, is almost so well known in this regard that I'm talking about, that business manipulates you with that. They actually build our cars so that they're not sturdy, that they could make the bodies out of a kind of plastic or whatever and not paint them so shiny.
Mhm.
The shiny paint has two qualities. One is attracted the new buyer, how beautiful the car is with that, and then look how easy that shininess is to disturb. It's
Mhm.
very fragile. If they made the cars so much more substantial, they may not be quite as pretty, but then dents, scrapes, scratches, and that kind of stuff is not even going to show.
Mhm.
But that means that cars are more durable, they'll be kept longer, and then the automobile industry doesn't make nearly so much money. Okay? So that's that whole quality then, is that the whole society is built upon a bait and switch. The bait is that you buy our product, you'll feel good, and then the switch is, but it's not going to last long, and you're going to feel sad and want a new one.
Mhm.
And so that cycle is manipulated. The business industry want, and not only the business, but in fact, religion. Religion does not want a happy audience. They want them to be only happy when they're in church, and when they go home, they want them to stay miserable. But the people who are happy all week, they wouldn't go to church. They don't need to go to church. And so it's part of religion also. And the education is built that way. You need our education. If you don't have our education, you'll have a terrible life. That's the story. So much of society is built around keeping people sad and unhappy and miserable. And so you're actually, by becoming happy through your meditation, you're actually going against the flow of your entire society. And you can. You know that you can. You've been practicing long enough now that you know that no matter how sad or obstructed or critical you get of your mind, you can remember to come out of that. You can do it. And this is part of the process of learning how to do that, is by here working directly with the sadness, first off, as a hindrance to be manipulated. And once we learn to manipulate it and throw it out, now the next time when it comes, it's not so much of a hindrance. And but it will reoccur. We know it's going to reoccur. I would not want to have the kind of life where people and friends and laptops and dogs and all of that kind of stuff was not dear to me. But I know that each one of them, when I lose it, I'm going to be sad. And if I'm mindfully sad, it's good. It's a friend. But if the sadness comes without the training that we're talking about, then it seems to overwhelm us. And we want to do anything to get rid of it. And then we do wrong things to try to get rid of it. So now we know we're going to work directly with that sadness. Where is it? Is it big? Is it small? Does it move around? If I breathe, do I change the qualities of it? Can I actually breathe it out and let the sadness come out? Or what is it that I can do to begin to take control over this sadness? That it's no longer an obstacle to meditation. It becomes actually the meditation itself. And by doing so, now we're in charge. Now the frontal cortex is working with the body-mind complex, rather than having the reptilian brain do it for us, which is going to create the sadness. So the sadness is created with the feeling part of the brain, but seeing that sadness and working with it directly is now going to be an object of the frontal cortex to realign that body chemistry. So that whatever body chemistry there is that is affecting us with these internal sensations of sadness can in fact be manipulated with the frontal cortex. We can think about it in that wise kind of way of taking deep breaths. In fact, one of the ways of doing it is by taking a really, really deep breath, noticing how that full up top air changes that feeling of sadness. And then when you let out, exhale completely, how does that change that sadness? And so working with it with the breath and other things like that, again, make it a toy to play with. To see your sadness as a toy rather than a daunting enemy.
Great.
You're not the only one who deals with sadness. I think during Corona-19 days, everybody is experiencing a whole realm of emotions, including sadness. So dealing with that sadness directly, rather than saying, "Oh, I'm getting cabin fever or stir crazy, or I want out of here, or I'm dissatisfied," and the only solution is to leave the house and go out and do something, is not the right way. No, the right way to do it is let me stay at home and stay safe from the coronavirus and deal with these feelings of isolation and aloneness and sadness and sense of loss and all of that directly so that I can become free of it. Take this opportunity to be free of that stuff rather than wanting to go out to for the world to make me feel better.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, continue to enjoy your practice.
I will. I will.
Excellent.
All right. I'll give you a call in a few days.
All right. All right.
All right. Thank you.
By the way, that noise that we were talking about last time,
Yeah.
it's back again,
Oh.
only with you, but here the volume is so low that it's not bothering or it's not bothering.
Oh. So it's just me then.
Yeah, it's just you. I've
All
been
right.
waiting to see that.
I'll have to
It sounds
figure
like
that
a
out.
motor.
Hmm.
It sounds like something electromagnetically is happening. Perhaps it's interfering with the microphone. I'm not sure quite what it is.
Right. Okay. All right.
Uh,
I'll
here,
look
here,
into it.
dude. What causes right there, right now, and I can hear it. Turn your microphone off for just a second, and I'll wave to you to turn it back on.
Mm. Oh.
It's okay. Turn it back on. It is coming through the microphone. When you turn the microphone off, it's off.
Right.
So whatever it is coming. So a little investigation goes a long way. All right, David. Well, we'll talk to you later.
All right. Sounds good. Thank
See
you.
you.
Bye.